Fritz, are you all in for Massive Darkness 2? The Kickstarter is going to be rolling out shortly. We're getting more and more previews, leaks, confirmations. I'm interested in the Centaur character. And, of course, having a wizard in the party, that kind of makes sense. The heroes, the actors, look to be exciting. But the question that I'm asking myself, and there's this duality here, certainly you don't have to sell me on miniatures, being a wargamer. Certainly any excuse that I can have to justify another dungeon crawler is going to be really, really easy. And the production value is going to be high. I expect a lot of different sized miniatures, end bosses. So that's a very easy selling point. But the question that I ask, and this is how I'm trying to navigate it, Massive Darkness 1, Massive Darkness 2, what we've seen comparing to Zombicide, you had Zombicide Modern. Then you had Black Plague. Then we move through Green Horde. Then we move through Zombicide Invader. And of course, we have the reboot for Season 2 or Zombicide Modern 2. This idea of the not only the narrative changing, but modern versus Black Plague versus sci-fi, but through each iteration of the game, a refinement of the rules. Not that there was necessarily anything wrong with Zombicide Core Modern, but streamlining, refining the rules, much like we see with Gloomhaven 1, Jaws, and Gloomhaven 2. I was expecting Massive Darkness 2 to be a streamlining of Massive Darkness 1. The campaign in Massive Darkness 1 was tacked on afterwards. I like the idea of calculating the BAMs and the diamonds and the explosions and activating powers on the skill tree in execution. This is Massive Darkness 1. It was a little slower. It did slow down the game a little bit. Magic items were everywhere. The characters got very, very fast, powerful very fast. Whether this is good or bad, I expected to see a refinement. What I'm seeing now for MD2 is essentially a new game. This idea that it's really just Massive Darkness in name only and continuing the Lightbringer quest. So the first question is the rules. If it's a completely different set of rules, I'm going to be looking for not rule set version 1, but some really interesting innovations to justify it in my collection, where we have stuff like Dark Souls, which I enjoy, but also Massive Darkness 1. Is this something that's going to get equal playtime, or am I going to find myself going back to Massive Darkness 1? That's the first question. I feel like if it was a refinement of the rule set, since I'm about 80% liking MD1, it would have been an automatic sell. Would have been automatic in, because I could play Massive Darkness 1 and continue the campaign into Massive Darkness 2. But we don't quite have that. The second question in my mind is the narrative itself. I like classic dungeon crawlers. If I'm given a dragon to fight, I'm like 99% in. I mean, that was one of the things that really sold me a few years back on Dungeon Saga, the fact that I could take on a dragon. And in exploring that for Massive Darkness 2, it looks like we're going to like the underworld, the abyss. It's very Diablo-like. Diablo. I don't know. I have to see the miniatures, and I kind of now also have to see the rule set. Not that it won't be fun to romp through the plains of hell and deal with the fallen, but it's definitely not a classic dungeon crawler as defined. The next piece, which would normally be a good thing, the selling point for me in MD1 was the fact that, ironically, there were no boss encounters. Yes, there was a mission where you had to fight a hellhound at the end, but for the most part, where MD1 really shined was this idea that you've got the trash mobs you got to hack through, and you've got some named characters, but the wandering monsters, the fact that they just didn't hang out at the end and kind of taunt you till you fight them, you would encounter them and they'd be roaming and spawning in the dungeon. I liked that tremendously. I didn't miss the boss encounters simply because games like Kingdom Death Monster, even later missions with Wrath of Ashardalon, the D&D Adventure System, Temple of Elemental Evil. I have enough dungeon crawlers that have the big, bad final boss at the end, and that normally is a selling point. Massive Darkness 1 was, MD1 was a big refreshment from that. I got to kind of explore wandering monsters, roaming monsters, and play it from that different spin. MD2 is looking like it is about bosses. Now, I'm sure we're going to have massive models, epic models. The bosses are probably going to have sophisticated mechanics, all pluses from what little I'm seeing and what little direction it seems to be going. But I've got about 4 or 5 other titles that have that experience. So right now, the sell for me, and of course it always is about the miniatures, the sell is going to be the miniatures. How fast can it play, even in campaign mode? But ultimately, if the campaign is realistic, looking back at their last 2 offerings, it was literally like, here's the core box, but then we've got 10 expansion boxes that are all optional buys, campaign box optional buy, these 2 or 3 expansion places that are going to take you to different realms, optional buys. I mean, I guess that's just the nature of Kickstarter, where you're dropping like $500 or $600 just to go all in. And the duality, the battle, of course, always is with a lot of these Kickstarters. So much is exclusive, or even if it comes to retail, it might not come all in one wave. If you don't buy in now, and it's not even FOMO, if you don't buy in now, just logistically, it might not make it out. The good news, or I should say what also is weighing on it, is the fact that the production is pushed out, a year and a half, 2 years. So I expect the world to be a little bit more normal or back to normal with the pandemic going. So I don't think that'll slow it down. That also has my eye on Seventh Citadel. That's another Kickstarter that I'm really looking forward to. I'm really feeling, and I'm hoping that Seventh is far enough out that it won't be affected by delays in productions or materials. So I'm still on the fence. We've got to see the miniatures. We've got to see what's going on. But I was really hoping for a continuation of MD1, not just MD1 in name only, cashing in on the narrative. I know there's a conversion kit. That's a plus from that perspective. But we need to see a little bit more. Never say never. Again, not that I ever really need to be sold on a Kickstarter that's a dungeon crawler with lots of miniatures, but I have to see if a romp through the 9 hells is going to be worth it.